Good morning, colleagues.
Morning, colleagues. Morning, colleagues. Morning, colleagues.
Morning.
Morning. Is it
Morning.
possible
Is
to
it possible
mute?
to
Okay.
Is it possible to
Is
mute
it possible to
ourselves?
mute ourselves?
Hi, Lifson. Whoever you're in the room with is what's causing the echo.
Yeah, there's an echo.
They need to mute their
Uh,
computer. Thanks.
you think it's coming
You
from
think it's
me?
coming from me?
It sounds like it is, but it's gotten much better now.
Mm. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, it still
Yeah,
comes out.
So if you're in a room with someone, they would need to both mute and put their sound off because their sound is playing into your mic, or they need to
Yeah.
leave the room.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Wendy.
Maybe I should.
Maybe I should.
I'm gonna
I'm
switch
gonna
off and
switch
come back
off and come
again.
back again.
Noted, Lifson.
Is it much better?
Yes, it is, Lifson.
Oh, okay. It had opened two windows operating separately on the same computer. I think that's why it had the echo. Ah. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our post-COP engagement. It's more of a reflection than engagement, but depending from where you're coming from, I would prefer, engagements and reflections to make it more comprehensive. Um, my name is Leifson Manguo. I work for Oxfam South Africa in the programs department. I also work with Bongani, who is um, who is also our comms specialist and the team behind all this, Busi, Masana, Mandisa, and Nomcebo that are also supporting us. I think they're also online and joining. Um, this is one of the most contentious issues of our time. Climate change has become uh, a complex problem. Some would call it, part of a polycrisis. I feel it is the polycrisis. One issue that brings a number of other multiple challenges combined, and it has, an element of surprise. Quite a lot of the issues that we are facing currently are unexpected. We see a lot of flooding happening. We see a lot of temperature rises happening with extreme temperatures in different places. We see cyclones and the frequency of those cyclones increasing, including in South Africa. Recently, we had massive snowfalls in South Africa, which was last recorded, I think, 42 to 50 years ago. So we're starting to see, quite a number of shifts that are unprecedented, that are unpredictable, that are unforeseeable, and at the center of that is climate change and all the drivers for climate change. Our energy sources being one of them, use of fossil fuels, our transportation systems, our agricultural systems that rely on these, carbon-based resources for us to function. So we have this post-COP reflection to really ground ourselves into, some of the challenges that we have faced in the lead up to COP, what our messaging was, in the lead up to COP, what our key demands were in the lead up to COP, and now COP29 is done and dusted. There are still some negotiations going on, but it's as far as the COP29 event itself, it's done and dusted. There are outcomes that we will share and reflect on, and we do have a group of experts in their own rights, in their own fields, that attended COP that will be helping us to reflect. I will start by calling them to the floor if there's anything like that. But at the moment, I wanted to just kindly request that we follow a few rules as we engage, so that everybody can be heard and everybody can get a chance to speak. I wanted to also ask Bongani, there is a video that we prepared. I don't know if it's available now, if you want to just play it out so that it can ground us and give us a quick look at what transpired at COP. Bongani.
Sure, Lipson.
We have seen this throughout this whole year, that while this is indeed a COP that is important for the climate finance agenda, we have been shouting far and wide that this is also a COP of gender. This is also a COP of gender. We have engaged all stakeholders to
Thank you, Bongani, for that. Just before we start, I just wanted to highlight a few house rules so that we can be able to communicate and hear each other. The session will be recorded, and I hope that's all okay with all of you. And it will be shared on a number of our digital platforms, including our partners, having access to the recording. And if you are not speaking or on the stage, can you please, mute yourself or disable your microphone and your camera to, in case so that you manage your bandwidth. And if you are engaging and responding, if possible, can you please put on your camera so that we can see you and be able to interface with you and engage with you. If you haven't indicated, which working group you are going to be part of later on, please do so now in the chat, and Bongani will help in terms of allocating a working group for you. We do have 3 working groups that we are going to be using in terms of, finer details and discussions. And just as a way of introduction, again, my name is Leifson Manguo. I work for Oxfam South Africa in the programs team. I am here with the whole team that is coming and supporting us to be able to reflect and get an indication of where we sit as a collective working in the climate justice space. I am not so sure if everybody is aware of the SAACJ project. This is called the Africa Activists for Climate Justice Project, which has funded a consortium of 5 partners in South Africa. That includes Natural Justice, Oxfam South Africa, the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, PACJA, FEMNET, and Africa Youth Coalition, or AYC. And as a consortium, we have worked really hard to get to a point where we establish what we are calling the South Africa Activists for Climate Justice, the SAACJ, which is a platform really where multiple stakeholders are coming together to engage and collaborate and share ideas in terms of climate adaptation and mitigation, but also to inform each other and share knowledge and exchange ideas on how we can, as a sector, be able to adapt and mitigate from the challenges that we are facing. So that's what the SAACJ stands for, the South Africa Activists for Climate Justice. It is an offshoot, or it comes out of the AACJ project, in which we as a collective decided that, as the 5 partners, we work with a number of partners in South Africa. How can we extend this, how can we expand this platform and bring together a number of colleagues that are working on similar issues and collaborate and work together. We have a small agenda that I'll speak to. We have some quick introductions for 5 minutes, and then we'll get into panel discussions for about 30 minutes, a question and answer session for about 25 minutes, and then we break into working groups for 40 to 45 minutes to really discuss and dive deep in terms of, what are some of those key issues we think, COP29 brings out for our sector. So the policy and research and policy, working group, and also the adaptation and mitigation working group, as well as the JET and extractives working group. So we will get into that in a moment. For now, I want to give an opportunity to colleagues that are part of the panel to introduce themselves. I'll start with you, Catherine, from Natural Justice.
Thanks so much, Libsyn, and thank you very much to our consortium partners, Oxfam, for putting this together. It's really invaluable. So yeah, thank you to everyone, and greetings to all the participants. My name is Catherine Robinson. I'm head of campaigns and communications at Natural Justice. Thanks, Libsyn.
Thanks, Catherine. I'll go to Tando for quick introductions.
Good morning, everyone. The name is Tando Lupuko. I'm the coordinator of Climate Action Network South Africa. Good to be with you.
Thanks, Tando. You look different from the picture you sent, comrade. I'll go to Wendy from Ubuntu/Femnet.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm standing outside. I'm at another engagement. My name is Wendy Pakir. I'm from Ubuntu Rural Women and Youth Movement based in the Western Cape in South Africa.
Thanks, Wendy, and thanks for being a comrade and having to step out of different engagements just to be part of this. Nazir sent an apology. I'm not so sure if he's online yet, but if not, I'll go to Juliet from Pacta. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia
Okay.
from Pagja, South Africa. So the new Pagja, South Africa. And I will also be presenting the comments from Mandla from Environmental Justice Network. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Sorry for getting your name wrong. I said Juliet instead of Julia. So let's get into it. I mean, COP29 was dubbed, the finance COP, or some people call it the People's COP. There was a new collective quantified goal that was on the agenda on climate finance, and it was a contentious issue where developing countries were putting up a figure of about 1.5 trillion of funding that they were expecting and looking for. And then there was a 1.3 trillion compromise figure that was being debated. And we came out with about 300 billion as a final outcome. So I will start with my first speaker, Catherine Robinson. She has introduced herself, but I will just read a little bit about her and where she comes from and what she stands for. As she mentioned, she's from National Justice. She's the head of campaigns and communications. Her work advances strategic campaigning, communications and media relations on the continent and globally to support natural justice in its litigation and legal empowerment work, and also in solidarity with local communities, activists, and climate justice defenders that we work with. She is a Bachelor of Journalism from the University of Rhodes, and she's also currently working, you know, for a certification in business and human rights law. So Catherine, if you would want to jump into this, what does the new quantified climate goal really stand for, and what does it mean for developing countries in Africa, in South Africa, and the global South in general?
Thanks so much, Livson. Maybe I can give a little bit of background to the NCQG, or the New Collective Quantified Goal, just for folks who don't know the history of it. So essentially, as we know, climate action needs to be financed, and it was agreed under the Paris Climate Agreements, the Paris Climate Accords, and the UN Convention on Climate Change, that developed countries who have eaten most of the carbon budget, and therefore based on historical responsibility for creating the climate crisis, based on equity, and based on common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities, developed countries would put up the money to fund mitigation of climate action, or rather climate change, adaptation to climate change, and in response to loss and damage. These are climate-induced disasters that cause loss and damage in the global south primarily, right? So now in 2009, there was an agreement that developed countries would mobilize 100 billion, which is not, it wasn't science-based, and it wasn't needs-based. So this was back in 2009, so it's quite a long time ago. And developed countries consistently up until now have failed to meet that objective. They haven't put that money on the table, right? So this COP29 was an opportunity for states to come together and negotiate a new collective quantified goal. And there was very much a focus on quantity of what that goal would be. And as you were saying, Libson, basically, developing countries made it very clear, based on science, based on economic projections and current economic budgets of what they're facing now in terms of mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, what they needed. And like you said, they had asked for a minimum of 1.3 trillion US dollars per year up until 2035. Why? Because they need to address climate change, they need to adapt to climate change, and they need to mitigate. They need to be able to have the money to transition away from fossil fuels to keep the 1.5 global warming target alive, essentially. Because if we overshoot that 1.5 target, we have catastrophic levels of climate change, with the global south bearing the brunt. And not just global south, we're seeing climate disasters in the global north as well, right? So it's that money is not just, it's not just for random climate action. It's really to ensure that the world doesn't overshoot that 1.5 target. So the developing countries made it very clear what they needed based on science, based on need, and essentially developed countries shirked their responsibility, as they have been doing for decades, their moral and legal obligation to put money on the table. They basically came up with 300 billion by, not annually, not until, but by 2035. So essentially absolutely peanuts. And this doesn't even meet what we need, right? So if you just think about how much we need annually, there's a 400 billion adaptation finance gap annually, but they want to give us 300 billion by 2035. Then I can just quote Fadel Kawob. He is a Kenyan economist and climate activist. He's given us a sense of what this means. If you adjust for a 5% inflation rate by 2035, the NCQG will amount to 175 billion in today's terms. And that barely exceeds the 163 billion debt servicing that Africa pays every year. So that's nothing. We basically have nothing left for climate action, okay? Now, the countries who were blocking are obviously the global north countries, the countries who are most responsible for the climate crisis. They are responsible for 92% of the historical global emissions, right? It was primarily led by the US and the EU. These are the same countries that have abstained and just blocked a resolution at the UN for an international tax cooperation resolution, right? To fight illicit financial flows and to ensure that there's tax regulation and tax justice. These are the same countries that have done that. These are the same countries that are spending close to $2 trillion annually on military aid, right? So when we see what's happening in Palestine and Lebanon, in Sudan and the DRC, we've got plenty of money for genocide and war, but we don't have enough money for climate action. Now, if I may, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about how much what this means for Africa, right? And how much we need as Africans and as South Africa specifically. Let me just find my notes here. So South Africa, if you just think about the KZN floods in 2022, okay, that killed 400 people. It caused an estimated 17 billion rand in economic losses. 12,000 people, their homes were destroyed, 40,000 people displaced. Now, the Climate Policy Initiative estimates that South Africa requires, on average, 334 billion per year, this is in rands, to meet net zero by 2050. But in fact, if we are to keep the 1.5 target alive, we need as a country 530 billion per year to meet our NDC target our nationally determined contributions. This is just mitigation. This doesn't cover adaptation, nor does it cover loss and damage. So if you think about it in those terms, we've got absolutely nothing out of this COP. We haven't just got peanuts. We've essentially got a kick in the teeth from the developed nations. Africa, just the loss and damage in Africa costs Africa an estimated range of between 290 billion and 440 billion. And this is what it's going to cost between now and 2030 each year, right? We need as a continent 290 billion US dollars, between 290 billion US dollars and 440 billion US dollars for loss and damage every year because of the climate disasters that we continue to face. And this doesn't, again, this is just for loss and damage. On top of that, we need 2.5 trillion in total for climate financing per year to meet our nationally determined contributions, to ensure that we can transition away from fossil fuels. So when you think about it in those terms, we have really been screwed over by the global north, the historical polluters, and the states that are most responsible for the climate crisis. And yet our continent and other global south continents and countries are bearing the brunt. So the point is, this is a policy choice. How much the developed countries want to spend on climate action is a political policy choice. Because, like I said, they've got plenty of money for other things. The same countries that were blocking this finance and the same countries that are blocking progressive economic global governance across the world, these are the same countries that are responsible for 51% of the new oil and gas fields that are being planned as we speak in the next decade. This is the decade of action. Before 2030, if we overshoot 1.5, which we are, based on science, it looks like we're heading more towards 2.5, 3 degrees warming. These are the same countries. So they're failing in their responsibility to mitigate. They're failing in their responsibility to put money on the table to help the rest of the world. This is they've completely undermined the convention. They've completely undermined the principles of the Paris Accords. And they're undermining international law and global cooperation for a global problem that is ultimately going to affect them as well. But the issue is that the global south and Africa are facing the crisis now. It's literally comes down to a life and death situation for people on the continent and the rest of the global south. So it's basically the developed countries see citizens of the global south as collateral damage, essentially. Like, oh, well, sorry, it's not affecting us, but too bad, sorry for you. So, it comes across as pretty racist from that perspective as well, because they don't really care about the black and brown people in the global south that are dying and surviving on the front lines of the climate crisis. And then just to end off on the NCQG, essentially the least developed countries, the African group of negotiators, the G77, were rejecting the number that was put on the table. The least developed countries and the Alliance of Small Island States walked out of the negotiations. Unfortunately, under the presidency of Baku and Azerbaijan, they pushed through the outcome of the NCQG, despite it not having a kind of a collective agreement by the states. And right at the end, we saw Bolivia, Nigeria, and India lambasting the COP presidency for their lack of due process, for basically saying that this is the outcome, done and dusted, and they've rejected the outcome. But it doesn't really change what it means for us as South Africans and folks on the rest of the continent. So that's what we've got. But I'll stop there, Livson, and maybe later on I could talk a little bit about how gender and human rights are bargained away under these negotiations. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Catherine, on that background and that comprehensive overview. And I'm sure people in the room will be clamoring to get a hand on those notes and those stats that you have been sharing. So if, as part of our ending off, we could probably also, extend and supply that information to the rest of the collective. I have Wendy Pakir from the Western Cape. She's from Ubuntu Rural Women, also working with Femnet. Wendy is a feminist and gender activist with 22 years experience in land justice, labor and human rights, and gender-based violence. She's a former farm worker herself and a founder of the Ubuntu Rural Women and Youth Movement. There's quite a lot more that she has written, but because of time, I would not get into it, and I'll share, some of these profiles once we're done. I just wanted to, when Catherine was ending off, she's talked about implications of climate change on women, on children, on communities and grassroots organizations such as yours that are championing, the fight for, respect of human rights, including the right to a clean environment, the right to a safe environment, the right to clean water, the right to food, and all those other, rights enshrined in our constitution. What is your take when you look at the recent COP outcomes with respect to, respecting and, adhering to the human rights that are sacrosanct and in our constitution?
Yeah, Larson, thank you so much for having me part of this, and it was such a great experience at COP. Also seeing the video and the protest that is happening and what is happening at COP, I felt that there was a sense of urgency. It was very different to COP in Egypt in COP27 when there was a lot of fragmentation. But at this COP, I saw people coming together and a lot of protests happening outside the gates of COP, and also inside, around nuclear, around the Amazon, protection of the Amazon, and so many things, fighting for climate adaptation. So what has been offered is the slap in the face, if I can call it like that. It's barely nothing. And what we are saying is that, and I saw a poster yesterday, that there's money for wars, there isn't money for climate adaptation. And basically, that's what it is about. We are at the receiving end, especially the women that I think of, the marginalized, the poor communities, mining affected communities, where the global north and all these big companies and mining corporations, they extracted so much from us, from Africa, from across the world, building their empires on the backs of hardships. And what are we seeing, and what is the effects that our women are seeing and us on the ground, me living on a farm? It's the effect of climate change. It's the disasters that we're speaking about. It's the very hot weathers of the Northern Cape where rain comes out every 3 years. It's the fact that the climate is changing and the earth is getting so hot and so dry. It's the disasters, the flooding that we're seeing. It's people being displaced, homes being washed away. That's what we see. And the global north don't want to pay up. And, and still our government is allowing oil and gas companies to come in and drill for oil and gas, and our very sacred oceans, the oceans that provide oxygen to us. And then when they give us these monies, there's also attachments, there's strings attached. And then there's high interest rates that must be paid. The generations to come will still have to pay of these debts. And what we are saying is that it's actually time for real reparations. Reparations where they pay up for all the damages done to our countries, paying up for all the damages in the hardships caused because of climate disasters, pay up for all the damages because of the high climate emissions and the fact that we are at the receiving end. That's what we need to see. They don't owe us money. They're not doing us a favor by giving the $1.5 trillion or whatever we ask. That's actually too little. They must pay even much more because it's the women on the ground, it's the poor communities, that must tighten their belts. It's the poor that see the effects of all of these that are happening. They must now find ways to protect themselves and to keep them and their families safe. That is what's happening. I mean, across the world, when we see the wars that's happening, sometimes people spoil the reserves. And then there's wars and things happening. We've seen the displacement, and wars also contribute to climate emissions. It also contributes to generational trauma even the trauma of being displaced, the little girls in the camps, the little children in the camps, not understanding why they've been displaced, why they have to move from a place to another place, often having no food, having no abuse, and having no sanitation. And that's the world. So I've been saying at another space, I mean, when I was part of the Oxfam, yeah, I'm very grateful for supporting me to go there. But Femnet helped me to get a badge to go there. And then I was part of this panel with African women across African Sudan, many countries where there's also wars. And I'm thinking of the role of the African Union and all of that, you know. There's more teeth needed at the African Union, because they must sit down with the European Union and we must start demanding things. We must stop giving up. And when they say jump and then we jump, we ask how high must we jump. We're not putting our foot down and saying enough is enough. You've colonized us, you've taken our minerals, you've taken our land, you've taken so much of us, and yet we still want to benefit. And that's the problem that we have. And there was a demand from Femnet and the Feminist African Women's Group to say that we need 50-50 representation when it comes to technical negotiations. About 12% women were part of the technical negotiations. Why? You know, we see, and then I said that it's men, you know, heads of states in most of the world, most of the countries. And look at the crises that we see in our countries. Look at the disasters we see. Because these men just think about themselves. They just think about money and power and all these things. But if women have to occupy these spaces, you know, we need feminist ethical leadership. We're going to think about the generations to come. We're going to think about the climate and the earth, because we are guardians of the land, guardians of the sea, guardians of the ocean, guardians of our soil. I mean, that is the role of women. And that is why you find women small-scale farmers, you find the women fisherwomen, you find the women as the backbone of communities, holding communities, the nurturers, the carers, because the burden of care is on women. And that's why we must push for more women representation, not just any woman that carries, who has the interest of the people at heart. And we need ethical leadership, people in love with the people and not in love with money. That's what we need if we want to change the status quo. So really, when we go to polls and when we go to elections, we must really choose wise who we put there. Because if our ministers of energy, if they're selling us out to these big mining corporations because they've got money, we must remove them. And then we must put the ethical leaders there that will protect the environment, that will protect the livelihoods of the fisherwomen, that will protect the livelihoods of the small-scale farmers and the people. And so that we can have better lives for all people in the world. And that is what I want to see from Red Knives. So when I speak about these things, it's getting so emotional because, you know, we see the hardships every day. We see the effects. We work in the Northern Cape where it's so dry, where people cannot plant food like they used in the past. And if we look at our foremothers and our forefathers, they lived in harmony with nature. They just took enough. They just took what they needed. There was no greed in wanting to make money in all of it. But that's what's ruling the world. It's about money. It's about power. It's about those who have. But the masses are a majority. And we need the masses to unite amongst ourselves across struggles. We can't have one struggle here, land struggle here, environment struggle there, and fight for this and fight for that. No, we need to unite all these struggles. And we must challenge the powers and we must overthrow the system that's oppressing us. That's what we must do. But it's going to be hard work. And these corporates that got the money, that got the manpower, you know, it's often organizations doesn't have the means and the money. And a lot of times there must be litigation to force a mining company to stop when the rights are violated. So it also takes a lot of money to fight in the struggle. But you know, I sat in a beautiful space now where the pastor said, and it's a gender-based violence space, because been 16 days of no violence against women. And we know when things are hard for men, often they take it out on the women and the children. And that also contributes to gender-based violence. And he said that we must always believe that there's hope. So whilst I'm saying all these things and all the things that are not right, we believe there is a power in the collective. There's power in the coming together. And, together we can do this. Because we're not only thinking about ourselves, we're thinking about the generations to come. And we're thinking about the quality of air that they're going to breathe. And when they are here and taking the struggle forward and we're no longer there, they can proudly say that our mothers and our fathers or our sisters and brothers were part of the struggle. So we're laying the foundation for the generation to come. Like we are walking on the shoulders of matriarchs and even men that went before us, fighting for the environment, fighting for the climate, fighting for justice for people, fighting for the rights of all people, and fighting that every person on the earth have a place in the sun. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for your contribution and for your insightful and thought-provoking messaging, and also, the activism that you hold. I think we all are, in awe, and we agree with your sentiments. I think, there is hope, but there is power in the collective. Hence, we have this platform that we are putting together to exercise that power as a collective, and to be able to organize and mobilize our grassroots communities, our marginalized communities, for a fight against, money and power, which is basically what we are up against. And thank you for being part of this discussion. I know you have multiple conversations going on that side. Hopefully, you'll be around for the question and answer section. But I just want to move on to Thando Lukuku. Comrade, there is a whole conversation around natural resource flows, a whole conversation around energy, around agriculture, around transportation, which are the key drivers of climate change because of their, fossil fuel based systems and processes that are sustaining them and that are making them, that are powering, our homes, that are powering our vehicles, that are also driving agriculture. Coming from COP and reflecting on, what does that mean in terms of our energy supply? What does that mean in terms of our transport? What does that mean in terms of, our agriculture? What are your reflections, given this the COP29 outcomes with respect to, to those energy intensive, energy based systems that we require to survive and to be able to live on?
Thanks, Comrade Lipson. Thank you, folks, for having me once again. As I said, my name is Thando with Climate Action Network South Africa. So quickly, just to respond to some of your questions, Lipson, is to say that, one of the big pushes at COP, both in 29 and previous ones as well, is, and I'm sure most of us have kind of noticed it, and I think Catherine touched on it, is this almost skewed perspective between mitigation and adaptation, right? If you look at the financial flows for all climate finance related investments, they skewed quite largely towards mitigation. And that's predominantly because mitigation covers the very topics that you just outlined. It speaks to how can we build infrastructure, how can we build energy, how can we build roads, how can we provide food en masse. And the sad part about this as well is that it's the mitigation component, precisely because of these sectors that get targeted because of the return on investment potential. We're dealing with people, I mean, even if you look at the JET-P, for example, we're dealing with sectors and issues here that in their implementation can only work at a significant scale. And with that scale, it also then obviously requires the requisite amount of financing. But with that financing comes with these potential benefits for would-be investors or investors to really rent seek about as much as they can. And one of the things that this kind of then touches on is then the debt component that it kind of puts, particularly developing nations, stuck in a perpetual cycle. And so in many respects, we see that there's the COP space in its ability to be able to respond to the very real needs of society, particularly for climate. But it's almost being cannibalized and weaponized at the moment to be able to drive significant investment, particularly from private sector to the public sector, from the public sector to the private sector. And this for me is when I look at it is one of the primary reasons for this continued skewed perspective between mitigation and adaptation. If you look at thanks Catherine for the link. I had a quick squiz whilst you were talking. If you look at that link, even the amount of money, for instance, that's needed to implement NDCs, right, across the continent, but when you look at it across the 4 regions, the big chunk of it, especially in Southern Africa, the big chunk of it is for mitigation, number 1. And then number 2 is it's all going to be, or largely, from what is private finance. So we're dealing with a very difficult position generally when we're going to COP. We're dealing with people who are willing to finance the negotiations. We're dealing with people who are wishing to finance the expansion of sectors that have traditionally been the primary cause of climate change. And the only thing that we're seeing happen at the multilateral space is the continued opportunity for most of these investors and power players to extend their level of influence and ensure that in the process wherein we're supposed to be getting the very real responses at a country level, that it's being used as a space to kind of lay the groundwork for particularly developed nations to have a deeper and stronger foothold in developing nations by creating this dependency syndrome. So when you look at energy, right, and the politics of energy, it speaks to dominant countries, economic powers wanting to ensure their dominance. And so they will make sure that they're not going to give us the money that we need to be able to transition away, or at least we'll transition at a pace in which they can finance, which allows them to continue their influence over our countries, right? When you look at the agricultural space, I think we've seen on many instances how agriculture is typically run by a small group of companies, but the agricultural space is equally very much dependent on the fossil fuel industry, right, for many of its implements. And so they work together to be able to ensure that even if we're talking about regenerative agriculture, we're talking about new forms of growing our food, it's okay to do that at a scale that doesn't threaten large-scale industry. And now what we're seeing is spaces like COP remain to kind of keep those systems of operating in place. So one of the things, particularly out of the outcome of COP29, I think that we kind of have to have a conversation about is where do we stand, particularly as civil society, when we're seeing that the multilateral space, which is intended to be a space where we all come together as countries and as equal partners, what do we then do when we're seeing that that space is slowly eroding, right? It's becoming less and less of a space where we can push for things like justice, for equity. How do we deal with that moving forward? Because the sad reality is this, right? As much as we're upset about the outcomes of this COP, there's still going to be another COP next year, right? There's still going to be another COP next year. And in fact, COP next year is poised to be one of the biggest COPs, right? If just to give you an anecdote, you guys were at the, I don't know if I should say this too much, but anyway, you guys were at the South African Pavilion, right? When we were at COP. And when you just mentioned COP27, I think in Egypt, our pavilion in Egypt was beautiful, right? Was beautiful. Our pavilion this year wasn't quite as beautiful as previous years. The main reason for why that was is because those who support the pavilion were saying, no, we're going to be driving most of our money away from this year's COP into next year's COP. You see? So there's already support that's been given and already resources that have been targeted towards these COPs and specifically the COP in Brazil. So what does it mean now for us if we're seeing that the space that we're operating in and that we continue to operate in is eroding, but there's still great emphasis that's been placed on these multilateral spaces for us to engage? how do we do so, and how do we ensure that we can begin to claw back some elements of these things that we're seeing are being eroded? And how then can we link those to these issues that you're raising, right, around energy, around food, around infrastructure? Because it's kind of getting lost in this terming of finance COPs. And for me, increasingly, it just seems like COPs are just becoming about the finance, about the money, to the extent that everything else just kind of falls away. It becomes a negotiating or bargaining chip. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack. I can just close by saying this, right? That my COP experience this year was slightly different to previous years, mainly because I got a chance to be very much in the different negotiating rooms, in the different coordination groups, where civil society would typically be outside of those spaces. And I think there's value in, and I don't know if we want to talk about today, but there's value in trying to discuss if the role that we continue to play is inside and outside, or just outside being the traditional space that we've always operated in, vis-a-vis being inside, where we can now begin to impact and influence the text, the conversations, the debates that are happening within these rooms that matter, right? Yeah, so I think I've answered your question in a very roundabout way, but please do feel free to come back if I missed something. Thanks.
Thanks, Tando. I think you preempted my conversation around mitigation and adaptation and the conflict between the two sometimes, and where resources are prioritized. I think adaptation might mean cutting down on quite a lot of some of those business-oriented, finance-heavy investments, and not so most of the investors are not really maybe interested in adaptation. That they would really rather go to mitigation and put their money into technology around energy, agriculture, and those other lucrative sectors that are climate linked, that are linked to inaccessive use in some way of the resources that we don't actually have, in anticipation that we would get a dividend, a climate dividend in the future. So that's a really quite a sad but real challenge that we face. You mentioned the challenge around COP becoming a theater, where yearly we go and we play a game and we leave in anticipation that another game comes again. And there are real, impacts on the ground, and to be able to outline what that looks like. I'm gonna call Julia from PACJA. Julia Mambo. She is a seasoned academic researcher with over 20 years of experience in research and development, and works as an independent consultant. She has expertise in climate change, mitigation, adaptation, policy, finance, and climate justice. And there's quite a lot more that she has put through. So picking up from what Tando has been mentioning around, climate finance and how it is skewed towards mitigation, what's your take, looking at the outcome of COP29, what's your take in terms of, the implications of that for our communities, for our people on the ground, and for grassroots organization working in the sector? What is it that we can take from this, and how can we start thinking through, adaptation?
Thank you so much, Lifeson, for the introduction. And what I am doing today is because I did not attend COP, so I am going to represent the opinions of PACJA Kenya or PACJA Africa in terms of how they felt about the COP. And I will also give the insights from Mandela Radebe from Environmental Justice Network, which actually take a look at what is the positive outcome that we can look for. And I think what I will do is I'll just share with you a small presentation that I compiled from the PACJA press release, which echoes basically what Catherine has said. It echoes what Wendy has said. it also echoes what Thando has spoken to in terms of the outcome of what was dubbed the Finance COP. I will just share my screen. I think it's share here. Yes. So, okay. So PACJA has dubbed this COP29 outcome as a flop, which actually echoes what everybody has been saying. The statement from PACJA is saying that, in Nairobi, November 2025, we absorbed the outcome of all the stakes COP29 dubbed the Finance COP. It is reverberating across the mountains, valleys, oceans, rivers, and all over the world. That once again, rich countries have their way, delaying action and escaping their duty to pay what is due to the victims of their actions. The USD 300 billion goal falls far short from the USD 1.3 billion that African and developing countries were pushing for to address the gap in adaptation needs and climate funding for vulnerable people. This is something that Catherine has already alluded to, that the money that they were applauding as a milestone actually fell far too short of what is needed in Africa. And again, PACJA Kenya says that hopefully the money will come in many forms and sources, defeating the spirit of principles of the Climate Change Convention and the Paris Agreement that calls for the provision of public finance by developed countries. Clearly, developing countries are poised to sink deeper into debt as climate becomes a new source of debt as they grapple with the rising development demands. And not just the rising development demands, but also talking to issues of loss and damage, issues of disasters. All those things will take a toll on African countries as we also try to address those disasters without the assistance of the finance from the international, from the developed countries. So more so, the deal does not inspire hope for less developed countries who have suffered unjustly low and access to climate finance due to their constrained fiscal space. This means that the problems from Africa do not end in the size of commitment. Article 6 has been messed up to center the carbon market and mobilization of climate finance. This is a bold departure from the Paris Agreement, centering carbon markets in climate finance as opposed to their contribution to reducing emissions, a role this market has played with a dismal performance from peaking emissions to the violation of human rights. We heard Wendy allude to the issue of human rights within the climate justice space. So this was a free lunch. No free lunch was what Africa was pushed to, technically being pushed to clean the pollution mess of developed countries to access the much desired climate finance. A COP where justice, equity, reparations, and responding to the needs of climate vulnerable people ruled the airwaves. This was a stab in the back. Unfortunately, the decision on the carbon market was loaded in the COP29 presidency closing speech as a breakthrough, a height of hypocrisy. For PACJA, Baku remains one of the worst deals in the history of COPs. In the coming days, we will be making an extensive analysis on Baku and provide the way forward for our members and partners. So in responding to the last statement, I have posted an invitation to a webinar which will be held on Wednesday from PACJA, as they are going to really analyze the happenings of COP and what happened there. So that is the COP position for PACJA, which basically echoes what the other previous speakers have said. In terms of them loading carbon as a breakthrough, we know that there have been issues in terms of carbon markets in Africa. There have been issues where, for example, in countries like Zimbabwe, the people have not benefited from the carbon markets, where most of the money that was made from the carbon markets was sent back to Europe, and the communities were really cheated out on that, which has called for Africa to speak with one voice in terms of carbon markets. I also agree with what Wendy has said in terms of speaking with one voice, speaking as a collective. What I have noticed is that the developed countries are good at dividing and conquering. So therefore, as Africa, we actually never able to speak with one voice, and that divides us in terms of getting what we need to get for the continent. But also, not that I am excusing the developed countries. Us as Africa, we should also start focusing on what we have as a country. PACJA hosted a critical minerals symposium a few months back, which was basically talking to how can we start using our critical mineral resources for Africa, not for export. The reason what Wendy was saying that, because they keep coming to, they keep overlooking us, is because we continue to give them our resources. One of the guys who presented at the critical minerals symposium actually said that most of the minerals in Africa have already been sold for the next 30 years. Whatever we are extracting has already been paid for. So we need to also look at us as Africa. How can we begin to stand in and to help ourselves from what we already have, without excusing the developed countries and without letting them get out of their commitments. The issue of commitment is also a big thing for me personally, because every year amounts have been given and every year the commitments have not been made. You talked about the issue of mitigation. It's because most of the corporates, they see an immediate benefits from mitigation. So, for example, there are targets that they can achieve. There has been an issue of targets in terms of adaptation. What kind of targets do we put for adaptation? Whereas with mitigation, their targets are clear. By 2030, we want to reduce our carbon emissions by so much. We are going to invest in solar, and we are going to invest in wind, and we are going to do this and this and this. The path to mitigation is much clearer than the path to adaptation, because you cannot measure the benefits of adaptation. It's difficult to put a value on adaptation. It's also difficult to put a value even in terms of loss and damage. For example, how do you value the loss of a human life over infrastructure? So in my opinion, remember, this is a personal opinion, I think the path to mitigation is much clearer. The targets are much clearer. People know what it is that they are striving for, and they do it. Whereas for adaptation, we are still trying to muddle with in terms of what are our targets, what kind of numbers can we put on our targets, how many communities, what kind of indicators do we begin to develop, not just to say so many communities were reached, but how was that reaching impactful on that community? Those are the things that the adaptation people need to start putting into context, so that we attract more funding in terms of adaptation. People are more confident of the targets that they are trying to meet. So that is just my position from the discussion that I've been listening to and from the PACJA position. So can I carry on with with the ENJ presentation?
So thank you. So we'll come into that. I just want to give Nazir, I see he's joined now, a chance to speak. We only have about less than 40 minutes, and I think we started a bit late and we are running a bit behind time. But I think you were starting to speak really around the cost of adaptation, and that not being quantified. But there are people that are already in the process of, putting forward solutions around adaptation, and people that are in the, farming sector, agroecology, for example, as a driver for adaptation, and how we can, go back to basics and start living in harmony with nature. So I want to give Nazir, if he's online now, an opportunity to make an intervention and comment on what the COP29 outcomes really mean adaptation with respect to, the agricultural sector, as well as the, and Julia, do you mind? Okay, yes, stopping the presentation and muting. Um, so Nazir, if you can, come through. I don't see you on my screen, but I'm hoping you are online. Um, and I'll quickly introduce who Nazir is. He is a small scale farmer, and chairman of the Philippi Horticulture Area PHA Food and Farming campaign in Cape Town, South Africa. He has been championing the protection of agricultural land, small scale farming, agroecology, and for a just transition in agriculture for over 10 years. So Nazir, if you are available, I can see you are. Please, what do the COP29 outcomes really mean in terms of, adaptation, but by extension, small scale farmers, trying to go back to basics, trying to, reimagine farming in a post, 21st century that is more in tune with the environment.
Thanks, Lipson, and thank you, comrades. So really, it was my first COP, and it was a very interesting space for me. It was a space that I can probably describe as both hope and despair. You know, I found that my experience there was I found hope in all the activists, small farmers, the events that aim to put pressure on the negotiations. I found a lot of hope in there. I attended a lot of the agriculture events. I attended the daily updates on the working group, which one of which Catherine hosted from NJ. So to get a sense of what's happening on a 24-hour basis there, and then I also attended agroecology events where small farmers were talking about their agroecological experiences, and really, and how they are adapting to the changing climate, and of course, agroecology was the big hope that came through for farmers. I also attended the daily. There was an agriculture group that met every day to also give updates on the where agriculture was standing in the negotiations. And so there I also got some idea of what was taking place in that space with regards to the negotiations. Um, so I my engagement with the farmers was really amazing. I learned a lot from what other farmers are doing in their agroecology is the practice of farming with nature, and it's very area specific. So if you are in Philippines, you will adopt certain practices that are beneficial for you as a farmer, but also for the environment. And if you're in Southern Africa, it's even it's even diverse in a sense that farmers practicing in the Eastern Cape will practice different things, whereas the Western Cape farmers will practice different things. But the overall feeling that I've got from attending and meeting all these farmers from across the global South was that they have developed their agroecological practice was based on fundamental principles. and those fundamental principles were really amazing to see. How it was amazing to see how farmers in different areas, different parts of the world, adopt these principles with regards to what the available resources are, what the local conditions are, and the capacity are. So I mean, so that was very interesting for me to see. And so overall, I think I have maybe two thoughts on the on agriculture. The one thought I had was that agriculture is not properly represented in COP negotiations. In fact, it's nowhere to be seen. I believe at Sharm el Sheikh COP, I think COP28, there was a decision to expand on agriculture because of its potential for mitigation. But I didn't see much of that happening at COP29. And then the other thing that I also want to point out that I think that the farmers from the global south was noticeably absent, and I think there's a huge challenge there in how to get small farmers practicing agroecology from the global south at COP negotiations, because I think that's going to be an important part of how we address the food system. Both in terms of the problem, but also in terms of what the solutions are that agriculture can provide. And then the other thing that I kind of noticed was that the agriculture group was driven by global north farmers, and it was very weird for me to see. So they are, keeping an update on what's happening, and they're promoting, kind of a regenerative agriculture, etc. But the language that they are using is not really around agroecology and food sovereignty. So I thought that was an interesting element, and which made me understand that actually we need to have a better representation of agroecology and small farmers at COP, right? And maybe the we should be sending our farmers, small farmers, over to COP in Brazil, for example. The question is that the UNFCCC need to be motivated, motivated to fund the farmers, global south farmers from getting to COP, but also to have have their own pavilion, to have their own side events. There was no real side events around agroecology. So that was what I thought could be something that we can work on. But overall, when I was thinking about this, and we were discussing this as the NJ team, it became clear to me that that we as small farmers practicing agroecology and involved in the just transition, we need to get organized. We need to get organized on a provincial level and national level, and then engage with our government around agroecology, around policies around it, around farmer support, etc., etc. I think we need to do that, and we are taking a number of steps already. And I think I'm hopeful that we will continue along the path that we've taken so far, because I think the agriculture component of negotiations. I'm not even sure if it's happening from the South African delegation. I'm not sure whether the South African delegation is even talking about agriculture. And I suspect even if they're talking about agriculture, they'll be talking about the agri SA version of agriculture, the industrial agriculture, and in the interest of agribusiness. So I think that's why I think it's important for us to build this movement, small scale farmer movement, and really deal with all the issues that we have outlined in our Umtata conference, where we're looking at the policies, we're looking at adaptation, we're looking at farmer support, etc., etc. I think we need to do the work on the ground. That's basically the takeaway I had from the decision, because really when I walked around when I walked around Baku, I felt that I felt despair, because Baku is like any other modern city. It's a carbon copy of cities across the world, even in the global south. And this so-called modern cities, in that capitalism is so deeply embedded. And this is reflected in negotiations, the COP, that agriculture and the rural and the peri-urban issues are not even addressed at this thing. And food is sanitized from its environmental externalities. Farming is divorced from food. Urban populations really drive the climate crisis discourse, in which the food system is not seen an important part of it. And yet we know that the whole food system contributes up to 50% of the total greenhouse gas emissions emitted into the atmosphere, causing climate change and causing all kinds of disruptions, and affects the livelihoods of small farmers. So I think that's some of the thoughts I had about my trip to Baku, and I would like to see in the next COP, from our movement, we send some young farmers, female farmers, but in particular to the next COP, because I think it's going to be important to have small farmers' voice at COP to drive home the issues of global South farmers. Thanks, Lipson.
Thank you, Nazir, for that captivating feedback and experience at COP, and thank you for sharing your ideas around what does that mean for small scale farmers, the tension between commercialized farming and their role in the food system, vis-a-vis potential for regenerative farming, vis-a-vis potential for agroecology, and what what we can get involved in as grassroots communities that are trying to adapt, and at what entry level can we play a role in terms of reforming the food system, but also reforming the global systems and forces that are behind our commercialized food system, the use of fertilizers, the use of agrochemicals, and use of intensive farming equipment that relies on fossil fuels, being actually one of the largest drivers of climate change. So that's really a very diverse set of views, a very diverse set of interventions and ideas coming from the panel. I want to open up the space for questions. I want to open up the space for discussions from the floor. I see there were a number of questions that were coming through, and I wasn't really keeping tabs with everything, and I see a lot of comments and solidarity messages coming from the floor. But I wanted to open up room for questions, and I see Nikita. Is it Nikita Vichama? Please come through. And you can mute yourself and put up your camera to raise your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Linston. But unfortunately, I don't know what is happening. I think maybe it's on your side, whereby you can assist me in putting on my camera. And now rushing straightly to the comments, because some of them are comments, not necessarily the questions. I greet you all under this climate. Okay, start my video. I don't know whether all right. But I can't see myself as well. But what is important is that I've touched, especially with the presentation by the first speaker, that is Catherine Robinson. What I want as well to put emphasis on as also an advice is that at Oxfam, you need also to take into cognizance of the academic people, especially with the agricultural background, so that at the end of the day, because I've seen whether it's an academic paper or it's an academic research, but I've seen the lot of statistics that is researched and hypothetically tested. So thank you so much, Catherine Robinson, for your presentation. I've also mentioned that we also need her presentation so that going forward, you can know what is happening. And also in terms of, because myself, Nikita Vichima, I'm dealing with some of the provinces, especially Eastern Cape and KZN. I'm an agricultural economist. So now I'm just going to talk more of the agricultural economist towards her presentation and also the presentation of the other speakers. I'm taking care of law of demand and supply and what is it on the economies of scale. And in terms of if all these countries can really put this reparation, so these things are going to assist us. And now to be practical as well, looking at what Julia and the position of the position of the company of Pacha. I would like when they mention of the communities, because in me, unfortunately, because I'm not seen in the video, there is a book that they gave us, the Just Energy Transition South Africa. When you look at that book is stating everything. So those are the things that we need to take into cognizance, not necessarily do the books and then don't care of what is it. In page 16 of that, the Just Energy Transition and the laws and policies in South Africa, you can look even in section 9, equality. Everyone is equal before the law and has the right to equal protection and benefit of the law. What is it that we need to do? As well as in many of the speakers, as Juliana also said, that in KZN in 2022, there was a loss that was made due to the climate, whereby there were floods that made the displacement of almost 40,000. I think it was the presentation of Catherine Robinson. What is it that we need to do? How are we going to go back to our communities so that our voice can be heard? As an agricultural economist, fortunately, you are sitting in all these universities. Like if I can mention, Professor Kestin was in University of Pretoria then, but now is in University of Stellenbosch. What is it that we can say when we are meeting with the ISA that is in all our platforms that we are sitting in, so that whatever that is it, for instance, 2025 is going to be the G20 countries that are going to be South Africa. But as long as Oxfam, you are not putting in the academic people, because there are papers that are there, so that at the end of the day, as much as there are farmers and all that, but we also need the people, the researched papers that is going to be taken into consideration. So hence I'm saying that it's also my input on that. Thank you so much to Wendy. Wendy, you've made our voice to be heard as females. We thank you so much. I even put down your times and the times that you presented. And then now, thank you also to Julia, because Julia, the Pacha position is the position as academics and as well as the researchers, especially of the agricultural economists, that knows from the roots of what is happening. Because some of us have been working in the Department of Agriculture for almost 30 years. Now we are in the private sector, and we would love when the farmers and the activists see and said, what is it really that is happening? And also, lastly, I'm advising that if you're working in Eastern Cape, Lavstein, make it a point that you're going to put the people that knows the institutional arrangements and the areas that is happening there. And now, if you're talking about this paper, and also to the people that we need people to go for the community engagements, make it a point that in order for you to have records, put the people that they know of the intentions of also of what is it in these communities and also in the provinces. So this is my intake. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nikita, for that input. Very, very profound and very straight to the point. The importance of research in our work. We do have a research policy and I think litigation working group in our climate justice movement. I think that becomes a key space for us to bring in research validated knowledge, including lived experiences and traditional knowledge on the ground, and make sure that it finds its way to these platforms and key spaces. Is there any of the panelists that wants to respond to what Nikita was talking about around the role of research in terms of understanding climate challenges, but also in terms of mitigation and adaptation? Any from the panelists?
Is Julia here?
Yes, go ahead, Julia.
So I want to talk to the issue of the G20 that Nikita raised. And this is coming from Mandla's presentation, who was talking in terms of how can us as the Global South take advantage of Brazil being the head of the G20 and being the head of the BRICS, because this brings together most of the Global South countries. So basically what Mandla is saying is that as the Global South, we need to rally behind Brazil, because Brazil can really be impactful in terms of not only just in terms of how the Global South is viewed, but also what is our contribution to the G20, to the BRICS in terms of our economies. So I just wanted to touch on that, that Nikita has said. In terms of research, there has been a lot of research done. There has been a lot of research done in terms of the projections, what is going to happen, what does a 1.5 degrees Celsius country look like, what are the impacts of that 1.5 on disasters, on flooding, on livelihoods, on pregnant women. There is a recent study that was done in India where most of the women who work outside are having miscarriages because of high heat, because of heat waves. So there is a lot of research that not only touches in terms of the sectors, but it also touches in terms of the livelihoods, especially livelihoods of women, which brings us to that gender aspect in terms of climate change. So, and also it talks to the issue of women as the ones who collect the firewood, the ones who take care of the family, and in terms of the impact not only of increase in temperatures, but also the increase in disasters and how do those affect women. So definitely research has a part to play. And as you alluded to, that there is a lot of research now being doing in terms of adaptation and targeting of adaptation and valuing of adaptation. That again is also coming from a research background. So research definitely has a part to play, especially as we're moving towards the social aspects of climate change, the loss and damage, the adaptation. So that is my my 2 cents in terms of the role of research. And also sometimes that the UNFCCC and their publications, they have repeated most of these things over and over. So there is a lot of information on the internet for people who want to learn. Not only from the UNFCCC, you've got the World Bank, you've got IUCN, you've got Oxfam, for example. All those institutions have been working and doing research in terms of climate change and the different aspects of how it impacts people, sectors, people, communities, gender. So there is research out there that people can tap into.
Thanks, Aunt Julia, for that intervention and response. I think research is available, it is out there, but maybe is it, is it being presented in the form that grassroots organizations and communities can, partake and be able to digest and contribute meaningfully. I think there's also an issue of researchers going into communities, gathering research, and that's it. That's goodbye. There's no feedback. There's no feedback loop that goes back to those, that we participating in some of this research to really learn from their own experiences and what the academics have come up with. So I think there is a huge conversation to have for those that are in the policy and research working group, and how we can make some of this research palatable. I see there is a hint from Catherine. Do you want to go ahead? And then Alan.
Thanks. I just wanted to compliment Julia's points as well, and Nikita, just to say thank you. Just in terms of the research, we had an engagement with the working group of the IPCC. They're going to be working on their AR7 report over the next few years, and their focus for the IPCC reports is going to be on gender. And they did also reiterate the importance of ensuring that any research that we do is in collaboration with research institutes. So the IPCC working group is able to access those as recognizable and reputable research pieces that can actually influence the AR7 report. And then I just had a point about Brazil. So I think absolutely key, as Nikita and Julie have pointed out, we really need to mobilize around G20 and BRICS, particularly next year with G20 being hosted in South Africa. I think we really need to think about how we push the G20 in a particular way. But we do need to also exercise caution around Brazil. As far as I know, when the G77 plus China rejected the NCQG amount, it was actually Brazil who pushed the G77 to accept it in the very end. And from my understanding, Brazil sometimes comes to these negotiations in bad faith, and they are the COP presidency next year. And because the many precedents have been set around problematic pushing through of outcomes that have not been adequately negotiated across all states, like the carbon market rules at the start of COP29, and then, of course, with the NCQG at the end of COP29, with these precedents being set and with the power play that these COPs are, it's likely that Brazil is going to behave in a very similar manner at COP30, where they're going to be pushing through outcomes that weren't adequately agreed upon or negotiated. So we do also need to exercise caution with Brazil. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine, for that response. Alan, do you want to come through? Alan, I saw your hand up. Do you want to come through? Are you able to speak? If not, I'm gonna open the floor for more questions. Do we have any more questions from the floor? I think we spoke about the importance of research. I also took down a question that came from the floor, and maybe this is for Tando. Should we continue to participate in the core processes given these developments, and whether the insider outsider approach would give us any dividends going forward? Tando.
Thanks, Listen, and thanks for the question as well. Yes, I think it's very, very necessary for us to have both the inside and outside track. They play different roles, right? And someone I was listening to explained it beautifully. On the inside, there's very little or very low levels of ambition to want to push beyond what is politically acceptable, right? Internally, but externally on the outside rooms, which is now the work that we do as a collective, that's where the ambition is highest, right? For example, NCQG and the quantum is the best illustrator of this. In the first week, we didn't get any sense of what the number was going to be, even though coming into COP, the number was always around $1 trillion, between $1 trillion and $5 trillion. But those numbers were typically coming from civil society and other non-state actors. Internally, or within the political space, my feeling and in my engagements with many of the folks, there wasn't that level of ambition, right? And if you think about it, if you noticed, just prior to the 300 billion being decided, the actual number that they had put down on paper was 250 billion, right? But because of the outcry, they then increased it to 300 billion from 250. It's not a significant increase, but it is an increase that resulted as a result of the significant outcry. So it's possible to always have that, and it's necessary, I guess, to always have this dual role between inside and outside, to support what's happening specifically on the inside. The other thing that I will also add to this is, particularly at a domestic level and across all African nations specifically, I think the thing that we also need to do more of is finding a better way to link, for example, the work that people are doing, the project-related work that people are doing, and then linking that up to the work that's happening at the national negotiator level, right? Because it strengthens the ability for the negotiators to push back on whatever's coming from particularly so-called global north countries, but use an evidence base in order to push for certain positions. So I think outside strategy needs to be complemented with projects that in either in their write-up or in the implementation kind of speak to strengthening of our position through providing necessary evidence bases. And then that will then support the work that's happening inside the negotiations, and then it will be amplified by what's happening outside of the negotiations through non-state actors. Thanks.
Thanks, Tando, for that. The need for evidence again in terms of showcasing our position and our negotiation base within the negotiations. So we continue to negotiate. COP is still critical, it's still an important platform to be in. There are other questions coming from the floor. Past Non-Dumiso, do you want to come through quickly? Just put up your question, and then followed by Pastor Lebo after that.
Okay, thanks, Lifson. Thanks to the panel for the great inputs. Mine is just a simple one. I'm just thinking, sitting here, around the aspect of mitigation. How do we, make the theme of climate change more relatable? How do we move it from the level of it being abstract to being more tangible? I've sat in groupings with some, high profile people. This is still not something tangible, something that is comprehensible. How do we have our own, local Greta Thunbergs, a young climate change activist, so that we win this war. My point there is, I think we need to work hard on owning it as a nation. I'm not sure whether this is influenced by my background research, but I feel really, if we do not involve, schools in whatever we do, community-based organizations up to the level of, street committees. The question of information dissemination for me is critical. While we are continuing to, having these conversations at this level, but I also feel we need to close the gap between these advanced conversations and also, keep the information flowing at grassroots level so that we don't, kind of work, ourselves against the tide. Thank you.
Thank you. How do we make climate change more relatable and tangible for young people, for activists in the communities where we live? I'm gonna put that question up for any takers, but let me get another question again from Pastor Lebo. Please unmute yourself and raise your question. Okay. We have a challenge there. I saw there are other questions coming from Dr. Janet.
Hello.
And Alan,
Can I?
Yes, please go
Hello.
ahead.
Can I speak?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, beloved. This is Pastor Lebo from the Northern Cape, in the rural marginalized district. As the previous speaker, Mama, I was just listening to her, and it pains my heart that now this issue of climate change is big words, especially when it comes to us now, the rural marginalized communities, where we are solely so much affected and we are mostly left behind. What are the interventions for to localize it so that now they can be much awareness, education to our youngest people, like Mama also mentioned, the schools and so forth. We tried our level best as I'm overseeing an organization founded by Girl Child in this region, trying to form a partnership with the Department of Environment, but they still haven't come on board because of now when this climate change bill has passed. It was something new to us in our region. Our people that are still misinformed, they lack information, they are still left behind. So now I just need to find out now what measures, what interventions, what implementation strategies are you guys now for the 2025? Are you going now to implement maybe those strategic plans so that now we can form part, and then now the grassroots level voices can also form part of this discussion, because of now it happens now, it is only on the national level and globally, but now the main implementers, the driving forces for change is on the ground. Thank you, beloved. Thank you so much.
Pastor Lebo. And I'm just gonna put down a few questions and maybe pick panelists to respond to some of the questions. I hope you won't judge me. So for Tando and Nazir, and maybe let me move to Nazir first. Being involved in the agroecology space. What are some of the ways you have used to involve young people and to make agroecology, accessible for small scale farmers and the people you're working with? Because some of those ways can also be relatable in the other sectors. What can we do and what can we, use as a strategy to make some of this complex language palatable and useful on the ground and for young people specifically? Nazir.
sorry, listen, there's a request from Alan before Nazar respond.
Okay,
He's
no,
asking if he can. He's
yeah,
asking
I
if
was
he can ask the question before Nazar.
okay. I was gonna do another round of questions given our time, but come through, Alan.
Thanks, Lifton. I'm going to be quick. Not so much questions, but just comments based on my participation in some events these past couple of weeks. In terms of the agriculture discussion, I think what's helpful for us to think about as a consortium of partners collaborating with community organizations and communities is perhaps to think around how we can connect the PCC, which under the Climate Change Act is a vessel that perhaps is the closest connected to government in terms of advising it on policy and legislation. And in this course of this week, I was attending or listening in rather on conversations that were being held by the PCC around the agriculture sector. And what was interesting to note around it was there was a lot of understanding or rather appreciation of some of the challenges that are happening at the local level and trying to brainstorm ways in which the experiences at the local level could be infused within the national provincial structures. And the gist that I got was there's an interest, at least from the PCC, on really trying to understand what a just transition looks like in the agriculture sector and really looking at not land reform necessarily, but agrarian reform that looks at how we can support farmers at the local level to be a part of decision making, to share their knowledge, and to sort of streamline a lot of the interventions around adaptation. So that kind of prompted me to think maybe as a consortium, as a movement, we need to see how we can support some of the work that is being done in the PCC, even sharing ideas and connecting with them, the commissioners, attending some of the meetings. And so I think that should be, as a strategy, should be something we should think about in terms of how we can establish a link between the PCC, government and local government, especially, and then us as an organization or consortium playing that coordinating role, obviously. So that's the one. The other thing is just to mention that, as we see from Baku, the department, or rather the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fishery, are really kickstarting ahead in terms of what has been decided at COP. And so maybe as something to think about, as organizations, as part of the consortium, is they are now trying to develop the framework that will inform the carbon markets, which will obviously have an impact on agriculture and adaptation, and obviously impacts at the local level. And so we need to see how we can galvanize support in terms of how we contribute to the development of comments, but even assist communities to participate within the commenting of this framework that has been published by DEF, and see how we can respond to some of the plans that DEF is now trying to implement according to the carbon markets mechanisms. So there's ongoing work there, but just as there is natural justice, we're trying to think around how we can participate in that process, and we're looking to see how we can partner up with like-minded organizations to help facilitate the drafting of those comments. We don't have a lot of time, but we are hopefully in the process of trying to request an extension from DFFE to open, commenting period well into the new year, because this is quite important. And so I think it would be quite unfair if we allow the process to basically be contracted within this December period. So I just wanted to put that on the chat and on the group, just to say this is the work that's going on. And as Natural Justice, we're keeping an eye on it. And so I think as consortium partners, maybe we need to convene like-minded groups, academics, think tanks, on how we can develop a comment that speaks to this carbon market framework that is now being developed by DEF, following what the decisions of COP. So yeah, I'll just leave that there for now, and we can always touch base offline. But yeah, I'm gonna have to hop off the call now. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Alan, for that insight, and we really appreciate further discussions, I think, to take on. We thought we could do breakout sessions and engage some more, but I think because of the robust discussions and the questions coming through, it's probably fair enough to continue in the plenary and with questions. And I had a question for Nazir around the two comments that came from the floor around how do we make some of this intense jargon that is complex and inaccessible to be accessible, and using the agroecology lens that you work in. How have you been able to work with small scale farmers and simplify some of the language processes and systems that you need to share and engage with them, and if possible, have you also done, I mean, if to a certain extent you've done this with young people and schools, how has that experience been?
Lives in your mute.
Oh, sorry. Was I on mute all this time?
No, just after you asked Nazir the question.
Okay, sorry. So I'm gonna redirect a question that came from Dr. Janet to Catherine. Should Africa, why should Africa always follow? We have all the natural resources that they need to transition, but we are not using them in a creative way. We are not innovating. We are not beneficiating our resources. What are your thoughts on that?
Nazir is back, listen, before Catherine responds.
Okay, no, Catherine
Not
can
sure if
respond.
he had you, though.
Yeah, so Catherine can respond, and then I'll go to Nazir again.
Okay, good.
Catherine, are you still online?
Sorry, I dropped off for a second there. Can you just help me with the question?
Yeah, so there is a question that is coming from Dr. Janet around Africa being endowed with these natural resources, but we are always following as Africa in terms of mitigation or adaptation discussions. And the question is, why are we not why are we always following? Why can we not innovate? Why can we not beneficiate the natural resources that we have that they need to transition? Why are we always at the back burner of all these discussions and not actually directing or being in control in terms of the narrative that is coming out from COP and all other platforms linked to climate change?
Thanks, Lobson. Well, I did answer in the chat, but I just wanted to reiterate, and Julia had hit the nail on the head with this one. And it's really about the divide and conquer tactics that are used by the global north to divide a collective voice of Africans. There are quite a few countries on the continent that have been bought out and or sell out, and that essentially divides Africans from demanding reparations and sovereignty over their own resources, their own fiscal space, and their own sovereignty. So I do think it is a colonial tactic, and I think Africans need to really resist this. Well, we need to hold our governments accountable, and we need to ensure that our governments don't sell out. And we need to ensure that as Africans, we're coming together to defend our resources and our land and our sovereignty. And we know from our recent colonial history that when Africans have stood up to defend their land, they're assassinated. We've seen a number of freedom fighters and African leaders that really stood their ground in terms of advancing the betterment of their countries and their citizens, and they were simply assassinated by the global north. So it is a difficult question, and it's not something we can fix overnight, but really Africans need to resist neo-colonialism. They need to resist neoliberalism, which is ensured that our land and resources and labor as well is just sold to the global north at to the detriment of our people and our environment. So the hope is that, us as citizens, we rise up and we hold our governments accountable and really stand together as Africans and don't succumb to the colonial tactics that have been used for centuries.
Lifeson, can I just add to that before we move off from this topic?
Oh, please go ahead. Thanks for the response. Please go ahead, Julia.
So, as I mentioned, that PACJA hosted that critical minerals symposium a few months back, and one of the organizations that was there is called AMCD. So AMCD is an organization that is trying to it's operating under the African Union, and their mandate is to look at how does Africa utilize its critical minerals. And some of the responsibilities that it has is, for example, when a country is negotiating mineral rights with anybody, whether it's a multinational, whether it's another country, the AMCD is supposed to be there to guide the presidents or the countries in how they negotiate for the use of these critical resources. As I gave an example that most of the critical resources that are being mined now have already been sold 30 years into the future at those measly prices and those poorly negotiated contracts. So AMCD is working under the guidance of, as part of the AU, to try and harness those critical minerals, to try and harness how African countries negotiate for those markets for those critical minerals. So there is a bit of work going on in terms of trying to bring the critical minerals of Africa to benefit Africans. And not only just critical minerals, we are also going to be looking into the carbon markets. We're going to be looking into the forestry resources, because all these things are for Africans, first and foremost. So I just wanted to add to what Catherine said, that there is work being done. The pace of the work, however, I am not sure in how quickly it will go, but this organization AMCD is trying to intervene in terms of the critical minerals. Yeah. Thanks, Lefson.
Thank you, Julia. We are running out of time. It's 1 o'clock. I don't know if there are people that need to drop off, but we can, if people allow, we can just extend by 10 minutes or so, just to finalize some of the questions and map out a way forward. I wanted to give Dr. Janet, is that a follow-up question or a comment?
Oh, thank you so much, comrade moderator. Yeah, thanks to everyone. What a very insightful and worthy platform to be. Thank you so much for the feedback session, because I guess normally we get to hear that people went to COP and people just come back and business is as usual. A big thanks to Oxfam and partners for putting this together. So just a follow-up. I don't know whether it's a follow-up or it's not a follow-up. It's not going to be a question, but it's going to just be a comment around, it's actually provoked by Julia's, the PACJA, position, of course, around critical minerals and beneficiation, and what she has just alluded to around AMCD, the issue of value addition. I was so privileged to be part and parcel of the symposium that was hosted here by PACJA as well, and AMCD was part of it. And what she's actually alluding to is very true, that our minerals have already been sold out. This is precisely the reason why we find Africans being criminalized for trying to also benefit from our natural endowments, mineral endowments. And this is a very critical aspect that fits into Catherine's very important input to my question around ourselves being played out against each other as Africans. There's somebody who has also written something around domestication of laws that or policies that our own political leaders go and extract from the global north and try and squeeze them to us, which is not even applicable in terms of context. The realities on the ground that Pastor Lebo spoke about are left out because we just absorb as Africans. Oh, by the way, if an African has to go down the shafts that have been actually drilled by the very same colonial masters for their own benefit, and they left our land damaged, no rehabilitation, nothing else. Today, you find a young Mozambican who is actually promised, because of all this poverty within our land, they are promised that there are jobs in South Africa in the mines. Then they find themselves underground without even knowing or blinking. And the assumption, because they haven't been exposed, they think, no, I have a job. And where do these resources that are being extracted go to? Straight back to the global north. So we are actually currently running a project with some of the colleagues that are here. I'm so glad to see the representatives of ZAMA, the Zimbabwe Association of Artisanal Small-Scale Miners, in the room, the NAM, National Association from South Africa, and I guess the Lesotho were here, the Basotho. We are trying to look at how best do we beneficiate these critical minerals, feed into policy, influence policy in such a way that we begin to speak to as one as Africans, as one as, we speak loud as a collective. Artisan or associations of artisanal small-scale miners come together and begin to squeeze out ideas as to how best can we influence beneficiation within our own continent for the benefit of the ordinary people. And that gets into the point of we no longer want this dependence theory to continue, in which we know very well this COP platform, yes, it's still very relevant, but it's actually exposed out there to continue belittling us as Africans, towards we all understand this race to the bottom when it comes to who has to wear the hat or who has to be part of the negotiating teams at those particular level. Then we forget whoever goes there are there to represent their own position from a national chauvinistic perspective. So I really would want to beg and request all of us to begin to have that Pan-African picture. As Africa, we are treated as one continent when it suits them. The global north suits it. We are one country, and they forget that they divided us through borders. So I'm not going to preach, but these are some of the particular issues that would need to request Oxfam also to support us in terms of the kind of work that we are trying to do. When you do this kind of radical work, obviously nobody will be available to actually support. But we have been trying with the little resources that we have so that we can have that united picture, the united force that speaks with one voice to say, okay, yes, fair enough, who designed the laws that have actually classified our minerals as critical in such a way that Jeanette cannot find herself being involved in that particular space as well. Thank you so much. Let me leave it here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I know we have run out of time. I'm just gonna give Nazir an opportunity to respond around some of the, there is a question around how do we make some of these complex conversations easy and palatable at the local level. So using your experience in the agroecology space, how have you been able to simplify some of the technical jargon and language in that sector, and to get small scale farmers to work with you, and young people, if you have any examples where you have involved them and engaged them, how has that happened, so that maybe we can learn and adapt same strategies for the rest of the work we are doing.
Thanks, Lipson. So it is a challenge to bring those very high and English words into something that the farms can understand. And I think this is an ongoing challenge that we face. But I think for me, on the farm, when people are engaging on the farm, we have on average about 30 youth visiting us when we engage with them around agroecology, around farming, around land, etc. And I found that some of the practical things that we do to connect the theory to the practice becomes important. So the practical aspects of it becomes important. So that's one way of bringing down those, to unpack those lofty terms and words. And then I wanted to talk about two things. One, just quickly, what I've seen, the syllabus of schools who have agriculture as in the curriculum, I find that the syllabus is actually far from ideal. It's actually more of the same industrial agriculture ideology, and we need to think about how do we develop a syllabus that can be introduced in our schools, to center agroecology as the medium in which we train young people, or educate the youth around food, around farming, around our environment. Then I want to say I support the previous caller and Catherine's take on how the African countries are being conquered through divide and rule. I think we must be under no illusion, comrades, that COP is a space, is a war. That's what it is. It's a continuation of the decolonial process. We are in a decolonial war, which we have many of the African countries have won since the 50s and 60s, and South Africa in the 1990s. But we must be under no illusion that the colonial powers are not um, furthering their agenda in raping our continent, raping our countries, and this time in partnership with the local elites. So this is a war, and this is a decolonial process. COP is a decolonial process, as far as I'm concerned. The global north has not paid for reparations for slavery, for example. We're talking about loss and damage fund. The slave owners have been compensated by the British government, and not the slaves. And so that is the kind of the situation we're in when we're talking about reparations for climate. So the picture is gloom, but I think we need to mobilize and get organized and mobilize small farmers and develop together with armed with the research, armed with the evidence from the ground, and influence our local government, our national government, in adopting agroecology and listening to the voice of farmers, and in that way we can influence going forward up to the level of COP. So that's all I want to say with regards to that. Thanks, Alison.
Thanks, Nazir. I think practical action demonstrations to people on the ground and young people is the best way of learning. Thanks for that, Nazir, and we will definitely use your garden as a teaching lab for young people and young farmers, so that they can appreciate and learn what agroecology is and how it links to the food system, and sustenance as we go. I want to close, and Nazir, sorry for being unfair. I think that was a closing remark from you, coupled with answering a question. I wanna give Tando and Julia a chance, for a minute of closing remarks, and then I'll just quickly state some of the next steps that we have put down in terms of taking the way forward, the work forward. And Nazir, maybe if you really feel like you need a second, then you can come after the colleagues.
No, I'm fine. I think I did my closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Tando.
Thanks, Comrade Lipson. Yeah. So just in closing, I think we need to maybe I'll touch on two key points. The first is to just recognize, as the previous speakers have indicated, that the COP space generally is a highly political space, right? It was always formed to be a government-to-government type space. And so we need to recognize how we might be able to link our work together with what the government is trying to put forth as a position, so that it can then better influence, or at least better state those when you get to the international COP space. The second thing is then to say, I think we have a huge role to hold these decision makers at national and international level to account through the continued actions and agitations that we do as civil society. Because without that, what we've seen is that the levels of ambition are extremely low. People are far more satisfied doing more business as usual than trying to kind of do business unusual. And so it's on us to be able to put the pressure and apply the pressure in a sustained basis in an organized fashion so that they move beyond their comfort zone to a space wherein we can start to see real action, particularly for climate, happen more so than what has been happening now. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves in another 30 years having more or less of the same conversations again. And honestly speaking, with very little change. So that's what I would say is let's figure out a way to work together with the government, but then still find a way to continue to apply necessary pressure on them so that they can feel it and then do the same thing to their counterparts in other parts of the world. And then if we can, lastly, just connect as well civil societies. And I guess this is the beautiful thing about COP. It connects civil society from around the globe at a single moment. And I think if we can have connect the global civil society in the lead up to COP and at COP so that the impact is even greater and doesn't wait for that final moment there. Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks, Tando. More solidarity, more connections, and more integration of different causes before, during, and after COP. Julia, if you're still online, can you just come through with your final remarks? Okay. I think we've lost a number of comrades along the way. So I mean, just in closing, I think we've deliberated on a number of issues. We have talked.
Sorry, comrade moderator, I see the Zama comrade's hand is up. Sorry.
Oh, okay,
Perhaps
okay.
he's got
Who is that? Because I can't see from my side.
Comrade Elias Masuk from the Zimbabwe Association of
Oh,
Artisan
sure.
Analysts.
Elias, can you briefly come through? No one would probably answer your question, but maybe if it's a comment, it's welcome. Elias, can you unmute yourself and So I think Elias is a challenge in coming through and putting up his submission. I'm just gonna take this opportunity to thank everybody that has graced us and participated in this engagement. It's one of many. We are looking forward to having a series of engagements as a collective, as the South African activists for climate justice, but also as working groups, within that movement or that collective. There is a policy and research working group, and I see there were quite a lot of discussions around how we can influence the PPC. Is it the PC? Presidential Climate Commission (PCC) a lot more. So there should be, I think, follow-up engagements. Oxfam will be in touch in terms of how we can arrange those. There are conversations around jet and critical minerals and how small scale miners and at small scale artisanal miners can also play a role in that. So I think there is an additional conversation to be had in that space. And then in terms of food systems and agriculture and also just climate adaptation conversations, Nazir, Wendy, and other comrades spoke about how we are connected to the land and how the food system is a critical driver of climate change, but also a solution to that. So there should be another setup again in terms of how do we really customize these conversations to the sectors that are represented in this collective, and how do we come up with locally led solutions, locally led adaptation solutions that can assist us in transitioning and also mitigating some of the challenges brought in to our shores by climate change, which, by the way, has no boundaries, which has started to also hit the global north in terms of floods that happened in Italy, in Spain, tornadoes in the United States. Those are indicators of climate change and its implications, but there is still, an adamant sort of posturing that comes from the global north around the impacts only being experienced in Africa and is an African challenge. So apparently climate change is an ultimate equalizer. It is started to show us how transboundary and how cross country it can get in terms of the impacts and implications thereof. So there are some very interesting conversations that need to come through, and we as Oxfam are committed to continue playing our backbone role in the collective of creating these spaces to engage and to bring folks together in terms of understanding the challenges, but also putting forward some solutions and some key interventions that can help us mitigate and adapt going forward. So thank you for participating. I also want to extend a hand of thank you to the Oxfam team working in the background, Sisbusi, Bongani, Masana, Nomtrebo, Mandisa, and our management team for allowing us to to be able to put through some of these spaces, but also to work with you and engage with you in a way that allows our communities on the ground to engage and participate in these forums. So thank you. Thank you, everybody. In that, I would want to close the session and say, have a blessed weekend. Bye from now. Elias, I see you still have a raised hand, and unfortunately, we couldn't hear you earlier. But if you don't mind, just writing through to me and the Oxfam team, and then we can take those those questions further in our engagements in the groups that we have. But thank you so much, everybody, and have a blessed weekend. Cheers.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Lifesin.
you so
Thank
much,
you to
Comrade
everyone.
Nina,
Thank you to
Director.
everyone.
Thank you, Oxfam
Thank you, our
team.
speakers. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank
Thank you,
you,
Nazir,
colleagues.
to
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, even the background of Oxfam team. Thank you so much. Lovely weekend.
Thank you. Thank you to the panelists and everybody
Lovely
else.
weekend, our beloved PPP advocates.
I can just hear PPP only. Thank you.